Imagine a night far to the north, where the winds whip through jagged fjords and snowdrifts swirl endlessly under a pale silver moon. The world is quiet, but for the low murmur of the sea against rocky shores and the distant howl of wolves. Here, in this harsh and breathtaking landscape, the people who would one day be known as Vikings live lives shaped by survival, courage, and an unyielding respect for the forces of nature. Their villages are clusters of wooden longhouses, darkened with soot but warm from roaring hearths, where the aroma of roasted meats mingles with the earthy scent of straw and wood smoke. Even as you step mentally into this ancient world, you feel the cold pressing in from all sides, a chill so deep that it sinks into bones and lingers long after you've returned to your own time. These are not the Vikings of popular myth, with horned helmets and reckless abandon. These are real men and women, bound to the rhythm of nature, whose daily lives are measured by the rise and fall of the sun, or in winter by its near disappearance. It is a world where every decision, from what to wear to how to sleep at night, can mean the difference between life and death. And among the habits that may seem unusual to us, one stands out: these warriors often slept with their boots on. At first, this may seem curious, even extreme, a detail preserved in the annals of history that invites both skepticism and wonder. But if we pause, breathe, and immerse ourselves in their world, we begin to understand that it is neither whimsical nor irrational. The Vikings' choice to sleep fully dressed, boots included, speaks to the essence of their existence, a life poised between comfort and danger, warmth and exposure, peace and the ever-present threat of violence. It is a habit born not from stubbornness but from necessity, a reflection of a culture that prized readiness, endurance, and the seamless blending of survival and daily routine. To grasp this fully, we must suspend our modern assumptions and enter their perspective, feeling the tension of icy nights and the quiet vigilance that marked every household. Imagine the longhouse at dusk, shadows flicker across wooden beams, the fire crackles and pops, and families gather close, children curled beside their parents. Outside, the wind howls like some unseen predator, and the snowdrifts rise like frozen waves. In this world, warmth is fragile, danger is immediate, and every piece of clothing carries both practical and symbolic weight. History whispers its lessons gently here. Through the fragments of archaeology, the sagas passed down in song and story, and the accounts of foreign travelers, we catch glimpses of a society whose resilience was unmatched. These glimpses are tantalizing: a well-worn boot beside a straw mattress, a cloak hung near the fire, a sword ready for a raid that might come in the dead of night. Each artifact speaks to a way of life in which vigilance never truly ceased. The night was not merely a time of rest, it was a liminal space, a thin boundary between safety and threat, a period when warriors and villagers alike needed to be prepared for the unknown. And so, sleeping with boots on becomes more than a habit. It is a subtle yet profound statement of identity and survival. Let us wander through this world with care, imagining the texture of woolen garments against skin chilled by the wind, the weight of leather boots pressing against tired feet, and the communal warmth of the longhouse that both protects and reminds its inhabitants of vulnerability. In these moments, curiosity awakens naturally. Why did they endure discomfort to remain ready? How did such routines shape their culture, their courage, their stories? By exploring these questions, we open a window not only into Viking life, but also into the human experience of adaptation, vigilance, and the quiet heroism of enduring harsh realities. Even as we begin this journey, a sense of contrast emerges between the harshness of the outside world and the warmth inside, between rest and alertness, between myth and reality. This tension, this delicate balance, is at the heart of the Viking experience, and as we move through the following sections, we will uncover the layers of their existence, the relentless winters, the daily routines of warriors and families, the philosophy of preparedness, and the cultural beliefs that shaped every action. Every chapter of this story will draw us closer to understanding why these remarkable people adopted habits that may seem unusual to modern eyes, yet are deeply logical when seen through the lens of necessity and survival. So now, let us step quietly into the longhouse, removing the distractions of our own time, and let the story unfold. Hear the crackle of firewood, feel the cold pressing against the doors and walls, and sense the vigilant awareness that surrounds every corner. Here, in this immersive space, we can begin to grasp the wisdom embedded in sleeping with boots on, a practice that symbolizes endurance, readiness, and the subtle mastery of living in harmony with a world that is both beautiful and unforgiving. Through this journey, we will not merely learn facts about the Vikings, we will experience their world in a way that stirs curiosity, wonder, and deep appreciation for the intricate dance between human resilience and nature's challenges. As you listen and drift deeper into this exploration, let the imagery settle gently in your mind. Feel the crisp northern air, the warmth of the longhouse, and the quiet vigilance of those who once inhabited this rugged land. The question that brought us here, why Vikings slept with their boots on, is not simply answered with words, it is understood through the stories, the sensations, and the lived experiences we are about to uncover. And in the calm rhythm of this storytelling, you may begin to sense the timeless lesson that echoes softly through the ages. Survival is an art, readiness is a habit, and even the smallest details can reveal the profound wisdom of a people who mastered life in one of the world's most challenging environments. Imagine standing at the edge of a fjord in northern Scandinavia as winter approaches. The sun dips low on the horizon, casting a pale, cold light across jagged cliffs and frozen waters. The air carries a bite, sharp enough to sting exposed skin, and the wind whistles through the rocky outcrops, carrying with it flakes of snow that dance like tiny spirits in the fading light. In this world, the climate is not merely a backdrop, it is a relentless force that shapes every action, every habit, and every decision. For the Vikings, survival depended as much on understanding the mood of the weather as on skill with a sword or strength in rowing a longship. Each frost-laden dawn brought both challenge and lesson, teaching vigilance, preparation, and respect for the elements. Winter in the Viking lands is long and merciless. Nights stretch on, sometimes for weeks, with only brief, dim glimpses of sunlight that seem more like a teasing reminder of warmth than a true companion. Temperatures can plunge far below freezing, turning rivers to ice and forests into silent crystalline cathedrals. The wind sculpts snow into drifts that block pathways, cover dwellings, and hide hazards. Even the hardiest travelers know that a single night exposed to such conditions could be fatal without careful preparation. Imagine trudging through knee-deep snow, boots heavy and wet, muscles aching, and the cold seeping through layers of wool and leather. In these moments, every choice matters: which path to take, how to secure firewood, how to keep livestock alive, and crucially, how to survive the night. The harsh climate influenced not only survival, but also the rhythm of daily life. Villages were tightly knit, built to conserve warmth and shield inhabitants from icy gusts. Longhouses were clustered near sources of firewood and water, their thick walls of timber and turf providing insulation against the relentless cold. Windows, if they existed at all, were small and often covered with animal hides, filtering the weak light and reducing heat loss. Inside, the air was smoky, thick with the scent of burning wood, dried herbs, and roasting meat. It was not a world of comfort by modern standards, but within these walls, warmth was precious and fiercely protected. Every hearth was a center of life, every fire a symbol of survival, and every sleeping arrangement carefully considered to minimize exposure to the cold. The cold shaped not only architecture, but also clothing and personal habits. Layers of wool, fur, and leather were essential, and footwear was particularly critical. The ground itself could be as deadly as any weapon, with frozen surfaces that numbed toes, soaked leather that cracked under repeated frost, and hidden ice that threatened sprains or fractures. Boots were not simply fashion or status, they were a lifeline. The weight, insulation, and durability of these boots allowed Vikings to traverse snow and ice, tend animals, and travel long distances, sometimes in blizzards where visibility dropped to near zero. In this environment, removing boots for sleep was not a minor inconvenience. It was a potential risk to one's health and readiness, especially if an emergency arose in the dead of night. Consider the psychological effect of such a climate. Long dark winters can be oppressive, weighing heavily on the mind as well as the body. Yet the Vikings adapted, with a resilience born of necessity. They understood that survival required constant readiness and practical thinking, even in moments of apparent rest. Nighttime was never entirely safe. A sudden illness, a fire, or an attack could demand immediate action. In such a world, every layer of clothing, every item of gear, and every habit was a statement of foresight and preparation. Sleeping with boots on was not merely a quirk, it was an intelligent response to a world where the environment itself could be deadly. The extremes of the Scandinavian climate also shaped social behavior and cultural norms. Villages huddled together, sharing warmth, resources, and vigilance. Communication about weather changes, approaching storms or hazards, was crucial. The climate fostered a sense of community intertwined with caution, where knowledge of the terrain, the seasons, and local patterns of snow and wind became a form of collective wisdom. Young Vikings learned early how to read clouds, track winds, and predict the onset of harsh weather. These lessons were passed down not through formal education, but through observation, oral tradition, and hands-on experience. Every action, from preparing firewood to securing boots and outerwear, carried the weight of learned wisdom. Even for travelers or raiders, the environment dictated strategy. Longships were designed to handle both open sea and icy fjords, and the timing of journeys depended heavily on climate patterns. A misjudgment of the weather could strand men in freezing waters or trap them in snowbound forests. The cold was a teacher that punished mistakes swiftly and rewarded careful planning. It also created a profound awareness of impermanence and fragility. In this context, the seemingly simple act of sleeping with boots on emerges as a practical, almost instinctive response to an unforgiving environment, a habit cultivated over generations as a shield against sudden danger. As you envision this world, sense the contrasts, the frozen, inhospitable landscapes outside the longhouse versus the warmth within, the threat of death from the elements versus the comfort of shared fire, the relentless pressure of survival versus the fleeting moments of peace. The harsh Scandinavian climate is not merely a backdrop to Viking life, it is a central character, shaping behavior, beliefs, and routines. It teaches vigilance, discipline, and respect for nature's forces, instilling habits that may seem unusual to modern observers, but are entirely logical within the context of survival. By the time night falls, the longhouse is a haven from the relentless cold. Fires burn low, shadows dance across wooden beams, and the air hums with quiet conversations and the soft breathing of those preparing to sleep. Even in this refuge, the lessons of the climate linger, boots remain on, layers are adjusted, and vigilance continues, subtle but present in every movement. It is here, in the intersection of human ingenuity and environmental challenge, that the Viking way of life becomes truly understandable. Each habit, each precaution, and each ritual reflects centuries of adaptation to a world where the cold is both enemy and teacher. In the stillness of the Scandinavian night, as snowdrifts whisper against walls and the wind howls outside, the wisdom of these choices becomes apparent. Survival is never taken for granted. The climate shapes the body, the mind, and the culture itself, demanding respect and inspiring awe. And so, as we continue our journey, we see that sleeping with boots on is not a trivial curiosity. It is a direct response to the harsh realities of a frozen world, a testament to human resilience, and a symbol of the careful balance between comfort, danger, and preparedness that defines the Viking way of life. Picture the dawn breaking over a small Viking village, the first pale light spilling across wooden longhouses, their roofs dusted with frost. The air is sharp and still, carrying the faint sense of smoke, wet earth, and the animals that inhabit the surrounding landscape. A Viking warrior rises with the sun, or in winter, with the faintest hint of light, slipping into layers of wool and leather with practiced ease. Every garment, every strap, every boot is positioned with intention, for the day ahead will demand readiness, resilience, and alertness. Life as a Viking warrior is not measured in leisure, but in actions carefully calibrated to survive, to thrive, and to honor both family and community. The morning begins with ritual and necessity. Fires are stoked, water is drawn from wells, and animals are fed and tended. Each task is performed with quiet efficiency, a rhythm learned from childhood, Warriors eat simple but nourishing meals, porridge, dried meats, sometimes freshly caught fish or hunted game, sustenance designed to fuel long hours of labor, travel, and combat. Contrast this with our modern, comfortable breakfasts, and one can sense the profound discipline embedded in these daily routines. Every movement is purposeful, every choice a balance between conserving energy and preparing for the unexpected. Even in these ordinary moments, the warrior's mind is never fully at rest, trained to observe, anticipate, and respond. The village is alive with sound and motion. Blacksmiths pound iron, shaping blades and tools that will be crucial for both survival and warfare. Carpenters fashion boats, repairing hulls that must endure turbulent seas. Children play in the shadows of these labors, learning through observation and imitation the skills they will one day master. In this communal environment, the warrior's role is both protector and participant. Their presence brings reassurance, their skill ensures safety, and their actions ripple through the village, touching everyone's daily life. Even in moments of apparent calm, there is an underlying tension, a subtle acknowledgement that danger could arrive at any hour. Training is an integral part of daily life. Warriors practice with swords, axes, and shields, honing techniques that must be instinctive in the chaos of battle. Strength is built through both repetition and necessity, lifting logs for firewood, hauling nets from the water, or wrestling with fellow villagers in friendly contests that sharpen reflexes and endurance. There is a constant interplay between work and preparation, a seamless integration of survival, fitness, and readiness. This duality, the mundane and the martial, defines the Viking warrior. Each day is a test of skill, stamina, and observation, a dance between effort and alertness. The mind of the warrior is equally disciplined. They cultivate situational awareness, remembering the landscape, the weather, and the routines of neighbors and potential foes. Their senses are attuned to sound and movement, the snap of a branch underfoot, the distant cry of birds signaling danger, or the subtle shift in the wind that could foretell a storm. This heightened awareness extends into the night. Even while preparing to rest, the warrior remains partially alert, ready to respond to a sudden threat. In this light, habits such as sleeping with boots on are not eccentric. They are a manifestation of a mind and body trained to endure and survive. Meals punctuate the day, offering both nourishment and community. Gathered around fire-heated tables, villagers share food, stories, and news. A warrior listens and observes, absorbing information that could be vital for future decisions, whether about travel, defense, or trade. These interactions are subtle lessons in diplomacy and social intelligence, equally important as physical prowess. Contrast this with modern social life, often casual and leisurely. For Vikings, every interaction carries potential consequences, teaching respect, vigilance, and adaptability from a young age. The Viking warrior also dedicates time to craft and repair. Armor, weapons, and tools must be maintained, for a dull blade or broken strap could mean death. Leather is oiled, shields reinforced, and boots inspected for wear. Each item is both practical and symbolic, representing the warrior's preparedness and status within the community. These routines reinforce a mindset of readiness, where no detail is trivial, and every element of one's attire and equipment is considered an extension of the self. Even the simple act of lacing boots becomes a ritual of readiness, a conscious acknowledgement of the uncertainties that lie beyond the longhouse walls. Travel and raids are interwoven with village life, adding an unpredictable dimension to daily routines. Warriors may be called upon at a moment's notice to join a voyage across treacherous seas, or to defend their home from invaders. Longships are launched with precision, each movement choreographed to ensure speed and efficiency. The physical demands of these expeditions are immense, requiring both endurance and careful planning. Warriors must anticipate the environment, the weather, and the behavior of both allies and enemies. It is a world where improvisation is necessary, but preparation is paramount. Evening approaches, and the village transitions into a quieter, more reflective state. Fires burn low, shadows deepen, and the frost outside thickens. Yet vigilance remains subtly woven into every action. Warriors check their gear one last time, adjust clothing layers, and prepare sleeping arrangements with both comfort and practicality in mind. The cold does not pause for nightfall, and danger does not rest. The warrior's day concludes not with complete surrender to sleep, but with readiness subtly maintained. This delicate balance between rest and preparedness underscores every aspect of Viking life, illuminating why habits like sleeping with boots on emerge naturally in such an environment. Through this daily rhythm, one can sense the profound interplay of discipline, practicality, and resilience that defines the Viking warrior. Life is a continuous cycle of work, observation, preparation, and vigilance, where physical and mental endurance are cultivated hand in hand. Contrast this with modern life, often punctuated by ease and predictable routines, and the uniqueness of the Viking experience becomes striking. Each day is a lesson in adaptation, a narrative of survival that shapes identity, culture, and the very way in which humans interact with the environment. By imagining this cycle in vivid detail, the sounds of hammer on iron, the scent of burning wood, the weight of armor and boots, the sharp bite of cold air, you step closer to understanding the Viking mindset. Daily life was never trivial. It was a continuous preparation for both the ordinary and the extraordinary, blending labor, vigilance, skill, and communal connection into a seamless whole. The habits that may seem unusual today, such as sleeping fully dressed with boots on, reveal themselves as extensions of this daily logic, ingrained through necessity and experience. As night finally falls and the longhouse quiets, save for the murmur of the fire and the gentle breathing of its occupants, the day's lessons settle like dust on wooden beams. The warrior's body is tired but alert, their mind trained and disciplined. The harshness of the day, the beauty of the landscape, and the constant push of survival have all combined to create a life both rigorous and profound. And within this structure, the seemingly simple act of keeping boots on during sleep is transformed from curiosity to necessity, a reflection of the Viking way of life itself, prepared, resilient, and harmonized with the world around them. When we think of Vikings, our minds often conjure images shaped by stories, films, and legends, fierce warriors with horned helmets, swinging axes, and sailing boldly across stormy seas. These images are dramatic, thrilling, and deeply ingrained in popular culture. Yet, step closer to history, and the reality is far more nuanced. The Vikings were not mythical giants. They were people shaped by the demands of their environment, by survival, and by a culture that prized both practicality and community. Understanding this distinction between myth and reality is essential if we wish to grasp why certain habits, like sleeping with boots on, were more than mere eccentricities. They were adaptive strategies born of necessity. Much of the myth surrounding Vikings comes from later interpretations and romanticized sagas. Artists and storytellers have often emphasized aggression and spectacle, creating a narrative that highlights violence while overlooking the subtler rhythms of daily life. In these myths, Viking warriors leap effortlessly from longships to raids, unfazed by weather, hunger, or exhaustion. Their homes and clothing are often depicted with minimal attention to practicality. But historical evidence, archaeological finds, and careful readings of sagas tell a different story, one of endurance, discipline, and keen awareness of the environment. These were people whose survival depended on careful planning and adaptation to circumstances that modern audiences rarely consider. In reality, a Viking warrior's life was dominated by cycles of work, preparation, and observation. Each day required tending to animals, maintaining homes, repairing weapons and tools, and cultivating both physical strength and mental vigilance. Meals were functional, clothing was layered for warmth, and sleeping arrangements were designed to conserve heat and maintain readiness. Imagine a longhouse at night, filled with quiet conversations, the smell of smoke and drying herbs, and the subtle shuffling of feet across straw-covered floors. Here, comfort was secondary to survival, and readiness was woven into the fabric of daily life. This context reframes habits that might seem odd today, such as keeping boots on while sleeping, revealing them as logical adaptations rather than quirks. Consider how pop culture often misrepresents Viking attire. Horned helmets, for instance, are a creation of 19th century opera costumes, not historical reality. Vikings wore practical leather, wool, and fur, designed for warmth and mobility in extreme conditions. Boots were sturdy, insulated, and essential for both work and travel. Sleeping with these boots on, especially in winter, was an extension of their careful preparation for sudden events, raids, storms, or emergencies within the village. The mythic image of a Viking casually shedding all layers to sleep in comfort obscures the constant negotiation between human vulnerability and environmental danger that defined their lives. Beyond clothing, myths exaggerate the Viking lifestyle as a sequence of thrilling exploits, overlooking the mundane yet critical aspects of survival. Daily life involved meticulous planning, gathering firewood before the cold became unbearable, securing food for weeks of darkness, and ensuring that weapons and tools were ready at a moment's notice. Their ingenuity is evident in the archaeological record: well-crafted boots, durable clothing, and tools that combined practicality with durability. These items, humble in appearance, reveal a people deeply attuned to their world, capable of extraordinary endurance through ordinary habits. Another layer of myth involves the perception of Viking fearlessness. While they were undoubtedly brave and strategic, fearlessness did not equate to recklessness. Vigilance and foresight were fundamental values. A sudden attack, an unpredictable storm, or a blizzard could threaten life in ways we might underestimate today. By sleeping with boots on, Vikings embodied a philosophy of readiness, a subtle acknowledgement that even in rest, one must respect the uncertainties of the world. This is where myth and reality diverge sharply. Popular culture often celebrates raw courage in isolation, but true Viking courage was inseparable from preparation, prudence, and understanding of one's environment. Sagas and oral histories, often overshadowed by dramatized accounts, provide further insight into the practical habits of Vikings. They describe long nights spent keeping watch, winters endured in near darkness, and strategies to survive both environmental and human threats. These narratives are rarely sensationalized. They focus on ingenuity, cooperation, and endurance. By reading these stories through a historical lens, we can reconstruct daily life with greater accuracy and appreciate the logic behind seemingly curious practices. Sleeping with boots on, once placed in this context, emerges as a rational, even necessary, decision rather than an eccentric tradition. This contrast between myth and reality is not merely academic, it shapes our understanding of culture, behavior, and human adaptation. By peeling back layers of romanticized imagery, we see Vikings as a people deeply in tune with the challenges of their environment. Their habits were honed over generations, refined through trial and observation, and embedded within a framework of communal survival. Every detail, from the angle of a roof to the placement of a hearth, reflects the interplay between human ingenuity and environmental demands. In this way, the myth of the fearless, unconcerned warrior gives way to the reality of a disciplined, observant, and remarkably adaptive individual. Even as we immerse ourselves in this reality, the lessons resonate today. The careful attention to daily habits, the subtle integration of readiness into routine, and the balance between alertness and rest offer insight into the human capacity to adapt. It encourages a perspective that values preparation, mindfulness, and respect for the environment. The Viking choice to sleep with boots on is emblematic of this approach, a habit that merges practicality with instinct, informed by centuries of experience and cultural wisdom. By understanding this distinction between myth and reality, we gain a richer appreciation for the daily rhythms of Viking life. Their actions, no matter how small or curious to modern observers, carry weight and meaning within the context of survival and adaptation. This clarity sets the stage for exploring their clothing, armor, and readiness in the next section, revealing even more layers of wisdom and strategy embedded in their world. The myths may thrill, but reality teaches, and it is in this reality that we begin to comprehend the full significance of the Viking habit of sleeping with boots on. Step into a Viking longhouse at dawn, where the air is cool but slowly warming from the embers of the night fire. Warriors stir, stretching limbs stiff from sleep, their eyes adjusting to the dim light. Each movement is deliberate, for the day ahead will demand attention, resilience, and the ever-present readiness that defines Viking life. Central to this readiness is clothing, not just a matter of modesty or fashion, but a vital layer of survival and defense. Wool, linen, leather, and fur are meticulously layered, each piece chosen for function as much as for comfort. Every garment carries the wisdom of generations, crafted to protect against biting cold, wet snow, and the rigors of daily labor. The process of dressing is almost ritualistic. Tunics, often made of thick wool, are pulled over the head, snug but allowing movement. Leggings and trousers follow, sometimes layered with additional cloth or leather for insulation. The addition of belts, straps, and pouches serves both utility and readiness, providing space for tools, knives, or small weapons. Outer garments such as cloaks fastened with brooches shield against wind and precipitation. And then there are boots, sturdy, insulated, and essential. In a landscape where frostbite and wet feet can be fatal, these boots are a lifeline. They are carefully tied, checked for wear, and treated to repel moisture, a task that could determine the difference between a safe journey and debilitating injury. Armor when worn is similarly practical. While myth often depicts Vikings as encased in elaborate chainmail or gleaming helmets, historical evidence shows a focus on functionality and mobility. Helmets were often simple, rounded, and designed to deflect blows. Chainmail, when available, was tailored to fit and allow agility. Shields were circular, light enough for movement, yet strong enough to absorb impacts. Weapons, axes, swords, spears were maintained with painstaking care, sharpened and oiled to ensure readiness. Even these items, as much as clothing, were extensions of the warrior, representing both protection and a statement of preparedness. The logic behind layering armor and boot wearing extends beyond aesthetics. Every piece of clothing serves a dual purpose: warmth and readiness. Vikings never knew when a sudden raid, a weather shift, or an animal attack might demand immediate response. Removing boots or outer layers for sleep could compromise both comfort and survival. In winter, a few minutes spent exposed to freezing temperatures could result in cold injuries or reduce the warrior's ability to act quickly. By keeping boots and layers on during rest, Vikings minimized risk while maintaining readiness. This habit embodies a philosophy of life where preparation and practicality are inseparable. The craft behind these garments and armor reflects both resourcefulness and artistry. Wool was spun and woven locally, often dyed with natural pigments from plants, roots, or bark. Leather was tanned and treated to ensure flexibility, durability, and water resistance. Furs provided insulation and added protection against wind and rain. Each garment was a product of careful labor, knowledge passed down through generations, an intimate understanding of local materials. Even seemingly simple items like boots were carefully shaped to fit, reinforced at critical stress points, and designed to endure long periods of wear. In this way, every item carried the imprint of wisdom, adaptation, and foresight. Beyond material, the act of dressing and equipping oneself is psychologically significant. Warriors prepared not only for daily labor, but for uncertainty, danger, and confrontation. Each strap tightened, each boot laced, each cloak adjusted is a rehearsal for vigilance. This preparation instills confidence and ensures the mind is as ready as the body. Contrast this with modern dressing habits, where clothing is often chosen for aesthetics or comfort alone. For Vikings, the layers of clothing and armor were inseparable from the mindset of alertness and adaptability, a philosophy encoded into daily routine and culture. This meticulous preparation extended into sleep as well. Longhouses were communal, with shared hearths providing heat but not eliminating cold. Floors were covered in straw, furs, or wooden planks, insufficient alone to ward off freezing temperatures. By sleeping fully dressed, warriors conserved warmth, maintained readiness, and minimized the time needed to respond to emergencies. Imagine the subtle awareness that accompanied these nights, listening to the wind, feeling the draft, sensing the animal's movements, and knowing that preparedness was literally at the feet of each occupant. Boots were both shield and statement, a tangible reflection of readiness and vigilance. Clothing and armor also conveyed social and cultural cues. Well-crafted boots, a finely woven tunic, or reinforced leather signaled status, skill, and role within the community. These items were not vanity, they communicated competence, reliability, and adherence to cultural norms. In times of conflict or travel, such cues could influence outcomes, whether in commanding respect, negotiating alliances, or inspiring confidence among fellow warriors. Practicality. therefore intertwined seamlessly with symbolism, reinforcing both function and identity. Consider the seasonal aspect of Viking attire. Summer and winter demanded different layers, but the philosophy of preparedness remained constant. Summer clothing focused on mobility and ventilation, while still offering protection. Winter layers emphasized insulation and resilience against harsh elements. Regardless of season, readiness was embedded in design: boots for cold, belts for carrying tools, tunics for layering, and cloaks for protection against wind and precipitation. Even sleep routines adapted to these seasonal needs, reflecting a continuity of logic that permeated Viking life. The act of dressing, equipping and maintaining clothing is in essence an ongoing exercise in mindfulness. Each day, the warrior evaluates conditions, anticipates threats, and adjusts layers accordingly. This mindfulness is mirrored in other aspects of life: preparing for meals, tending animals, maintaining weapons, or navigating terrain. The habit of sleeping with boots on is one element in a larger system of attentiveness, showing how even small details serve survival and efficiency. Through this lens, clothing, armor, and preparedness are inseparable. Each enhances the other, creating a seamless integration of body, mind, and environment. In the end, the Viking approach to clothing and armor reveals a culture that revered practical wisdom, adaptation, and foresight. Every layer, every strap, every pair of boots carries meaning, history, and logic. The habit of sleeping fully dressed, boots included, emerges naturally from this philosophy. It is a habit of continuity, a safeguard against uncertainty, and a reflection of the disciplined, vigilant mind that defines the Viking way. By immersing ourselves in this understanding, we begin to appreciate the sophistication, resilience, and subtle genius of a people often mischaracterized by myth. Step quietly into the mind of a Viking as night falls over the longhouse. The flickering glow of the hearth casts dancing shadows across walls lined with tools, weapons, and garments, each a symbol of readiness and survival. Even as the body seeks rest, the mind remains alert, subtly tracking the environment, listening for sounds that might signal danger, and preparing for the unexpected. In this world, readiness is not merely physical, it is deeply psychological, ingrained through daily routines, cultural norms, and lived experience. The habit of sleeping with boots on is an extension of this mental framework, reflecting a mindset where vigilance continues even during moments of rest. Vikings were acutely aware that threats could emerge at any hour. Wolves prowled near villages, storms could trap travelers, and rival clans might strike without warning. Such uncertainties demanded a constant state of preparedness, where every small detail contributed to survival. Psychologically, this cultivated a dual awareness, the ability to rest while maintaining subtle alertness. Sleep was necessary, but it was never total surrender. The body might relax, but the mind retained a quiet readiness, attuned to environmental cues and capable of rapid response. In this light, keeping boots on while sleeping is not discomfort for its own sake. It is a protective strategy that aligns body and mind with the demands of the environment. This readiness is intertwined with learned discipline. From childhood, Vikings were trained to observe, anticipate, and act with precision. Children learned to read the weather, track animal movements, and identify hazards in their surroundings. These lessons were subtle, experiential, and cumulative, embedding a sense of situational awareness into daily life. Over time, this awareness became almost instinctual, forming a psychological habit, where preparation was integrated into even the most routine actions. By adulthood, the warrior's mind operated with an ongoing balance of vigilance and rest, a state in which sleeping fully dressed, and with boots on, was a natural extension of survival instinct. Mental resilience was also cultivated through communal practices. The longhouse, while a place of warmth and family life, reinforced the awareness of external threats. Conversations, storytelling, and observation of elders taught young warriors about strategy, caution, and environmental challenges. Even seemingly mundane details, where to place a fire, how to store supplies, or which boots to wear for travel, reinforced the principle that preparedness matters. Psychologically, this fosters a mindset where vigilance is normalized, and anxiety is channeled into practical action rather than paralyzing fear. Sleep, in this framework, is a period of restorative vigilance rather than vulnerability. Contrast this with modern perceptions of rest, where sleep is often viewed as complete detachment from the environment. For Vikings, sleep was an adaptive state, calibrated to balance rest and readiness. Boots, layered clothing, and sleeping arrangements were all part of a mental and physical system designed to maintain alertness without exhausting energy. This duality, relaxation combined with preparedness, demonstrates a sophisticated psychological adaptation. It reflects a deep understanding of human limitations and environmental demands, where every habit, no matter how minor it appears, supports survival and well-being. The psychology of readiness also extends to decision-making under pressure. A warrior who is constantly aware of potential threats develops rapid assessment skills, learning to evaluate risk and respond effectively. This cognitive agility is reinforced by habitual preparedness. Weapons are maintained, clothing is ready, and sleeping arrangements allow swift movement if needed. By sleeping with boots on, the Viking minimizes transition time between rest and action, reducing cognitive load and stress in emergencies. It is a subtle yet profoundly effective strategy that integrates mind and body in service of survival. Fear in this context is not weakness, it is a signal that guides preparation. Vikings did not eliminate fear, they harnessed it, translating concern into practical measures. Awareness of cold, predators or hostile neighbors prompts careful choices, reinforcing the habit of readiness. In psychological terms, this is a form of anticipatory coping, where potential stressors are mitigated through behavior, rather than ignored or suppressed. Boots, layers and careful placement of belongings all serve as tools in this anticipatory strategy, allowing the mind to relax within controlled parameters while remaining ready to respond to threats. Furthermore, this mental framework reinforces a sense of empowerment. The Viking understands that, while the environment is harsh and unpredictable, preparation provides agency. Vigilance becomes a skill, habit, and source of confidence. Even in sleep, this mindset is present, ensuring that rest does not mean helplessness. Boots on feet, weapons nearby, and layers intact are not burdens. They are tangible reminders of control over one's circumstances, subtle extensions of both body and mind. This empowerment reduces stress, enhances focus during waking hours, and cultivates resilience in the face of adversity. Cultural beliefs further reinforce this psychological state. Sagas, oral histories, and communal norms emphasize the importance of foresight, adaptability, and readiness. These values are internalized over a lifetime, shaping not only behavior, but cognition itself. The act of sleeping fully dressed becomes a ritualized reinforcement of these principles, a nightly acknowledgement that vigilance is virtue, preparation is wisdom, and survival depends on harmonizing action with environment. In this way, psychological readiness and practical preparedness are inseparable, each supporting and enhancing the other. Even the physical design of the longhouse supports this mental state. Shared sleeping spaces, proximity to the fire, and careful arrangement of tools and supplies all contribute to a subconscious sense of security. The mind, aware of its environment, interprets these arrangements as cues for vigilance and safety. Sleeping with boots on complements this system, ensuring that the body is aligned with the psychological state of readiness. This integration of physical, cognitive, and environmental factors is a hallmark of Viking resilience, demonstrating a depth of understanding rarely acknowledged in modern retellings of their lives. Ultimately, the psychology of readiness is about balance. It is not hypervigilance that prevents rest, but a calibrated awareness that allows relaxation within a framework of preparedness. It is a quiet, disciplined form of alertness, where the mind monitors, anticipates, and adapts even as the body sleeps. In this context, habits such as sleeping with boots on are neither extreme nor eccentric. They are logical expressions of a holistic survival strategy, refined over generations and embedded deeply in both culture and psyche. As we continue to explore Viking life, this understanding of psychological readiness illuminates many other aspects: the organization of daily routines, the construction of homes, the design of clothing, and the broader cultural emphasis on resilience and foresight. By appreciating how mind and body worked together in the Viking world, we gain not only insight into their habits, but also a profound understanding of human adaptation and endurance. As night settles over the Viking longhouse, the practical wisdom behind sleeping fully dressed, boots included, becomes strikingly clear. Beyond ritual or habit, this practice addresses immediate and tangible challenges posed by the environment. Temperatures in Scandinavian winters can plummet dramatically after sunset, turning even the warmest longhouse into a cold chamber. Feet, often the first to feel the sting of frost, are especially vulnerable. By keeping boots on, Vikings preserved heat, reduced exposure to the elements, and ensured that they could rise at a moment's notice if circumstances demanded. This is a lesson in foresight, proactive care that blends comfort, survival, and readiness. Boots were far more than simple footwear. Constructed of thick leather, and often lined with fur, they were designed to insulate against snow, ice, and wet conditions. The process of preparing boots involved waterproofing, careful lacing, and inspection for wear, demonstrating the importance of this seemingly mundane item. In an era without modern heating or quick medical care, protecting the extremities was crucial. Frostbite could incapacitate a warrior, making both travel and defense dangerous. Sleeping with boots on, therefore, was a preventive measure, minimizing risk and preserving mobility in a world where sudden movement could mean the difference between life and death. The habit also reflects a philosophy of constant readiness. Vikings lived in an environment where emergencies were unpredictable. A blizzard might sweep through the fords in minutes, a rival clan could arrive unexpectedly, or an animal could threaten the village's livestock. In these moments, every second counts. Removing boots for sleep could delay response, increasing vulnerability. Keeping them on allowed a seamless transition from rest to action, a subtle but powerful form of preparedness that demonstrates the Viking commitment to practicality and vigilance. Another factor was communal living. Longhouses were shared spaces, often housing multiple families and warriors together. Noise, movement, and the risk of fire required that occupants be able to move quickly if needed. Sleeping fully dressed, boots included, ensured that everyone could react efficiently, whether to assist a neighbor, protect children, or confront external threats. This practice underscores a social dimension of survival. Readiness was not only personal but collective, a habit shaped by both environment and community responsibility. The physical comfort of sleeping with boots on paradoxically made sense in context. Floors, even when covered with straw, fur, or wooden planks, could be cold and damp. Heat rises slowly, and low ambient temperatures meant that extremities could lose warmth rapidly. Boots acted as insulation, preserving body heat, and preventing chilling that could disrupt sleep. This allowed for deeper, more restorative rest, even in harsh conditions, ensuring that the warrior remained alert, physically capable, and psychologically prepared for the day ahead. Practicality extended to travel and raiding scenarios. Vikings often slept outdoors during expeditions, or temporarily settled in camps far from longhouses. In such conditions, removing boots at night was not just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Ground conditions were unpredictable. Snow, ice, or wet soil could sap warmth quickly. Boots provided consistent protection, allowing warriors to rise and move immediately without the risk of injury or prolonged exposure. In this way, the habit served as both protection and efficiency, reducing the need for additional preparation at critical moments. Hygiene and maintenance also played a role in this practice. Leather boots, treated carefully, could withstand multiple days of wear without deterioration. By keeping boots on while sleeping, Vikings minimized unnecessary handling, preserved the integrity of the material, and avoided exposing delicate stitching or laces to moisture from the ground. This subtle attention to detail reflects a broader cultural value, careful stewardship of tools, clothing, and resources as essential components of survival. Every habit, including sleeping with boots on, was part of a system designed to maximize longevity and functionality of essential items. Seasonal variations further highlight the logic of this practice. During the long, dark winters, temperatures could remain dangerously low throughout the night. In contrast, even in milder months, outdoor temperatures could fluctuate sharply after sunset. Boots, as part of a layered approach to clothing, provided consistent protection against these changes. By integrating footwear into nightly routines, Vikings created a simple yet effective safeguard against environmental unpredictability. This habit, repeated over generations, became instinctual, a testament to human adaptability and learned wisdom. Cultural and psychological factors reinforced the practicality of this choice. Maintaining readiness, even during sleep, reduced anxiety and increased confidence. A warrior who could respond immediately to danger or environmental challenges slept with greater ease, knowing that preparedness was already in place. This subtle interplay between mental comfort and physical readiness illustrates how practical habits can serve both survival and psychological well-being. Boots on feet, layered clothing, and a well-placed sleeping spot all combine to create a holistic system of safety and efficiency. Ultimately, sleeping with boots on exemplifies Viking pragmatism. It is a habit that merges environmental awareness, psychological readiness, communal responsibility, and practical comfort into a single coherent practice. What might seem unusual to modern observers emerges as a perfectly rational adaptation to the harsh, unpredictable conditions of Scandinavian life. It reflects a culture where every action, no matter how small, is informed by necessity, foresight, and respect for both human limitations and environmental forces. In embracing this practice, the Vikings demonstrate a philosophy that values preparation over reaction, vigilance over negligence, and resilience over convenience. It is a small, everyday decision that embodies the larger principles guiding their lives: anticipation, adaptability, and careful stewardship of both body and environment. By understanding these practical reasons, we gain a clearer picture of Viking life, one that transcends myth, honors historical reality, and offers enduring lessons about human ingenuity in the face of adversity. To truly understand why Vikings slept with their boots on, we must look beyond the practical and into the cultural and social fabric that shaped their lives. Viking society was deeply communal, structured around extended families, villages, and clans, where survival depended on cooperation, shared responsibility, and adherence to customs that balanced individual needs with collective well-being. In this context, sleeping habits were not purely personal. They were informed by social norms, expectations, and the wisdom embedded in generations of communal living. Every action, no matter how mundane, carried both practical and symbolic significance. Longhouses, the central structures of Viking settlements, were designed to foster communal living. Multiple families often shared a single longhouse, sleeping in close quarters around a central hearth. This arrangement reinforced social cohesion, ensured warmth, and provided mutual protection. In such spaces, individual habits influenced the collective environment. Sleeping with boots on was not only a personal choice, but a behavior that promoted the safety and readiness of the entire household. In case of emergencies, a sudden fire, an intruder, or a threat to livestock, anyone could rise immediately, fully equipped, ready to respond. This habit illustrates how cultural values, communal priorities, and survival needs were inseparably intertwined. Viking culture prized resilience, resourcefulness, and foresight. These values were instilled from childhood, reinforced through storytelling, observation, and participation in communal tasks. Young children watched their elders dress carefully for work, maintain weapons and tools, and navigate the challenges of a harsh environment. Rituals and routines, including how to prepare for sleep, were subtle lessons in discipline and preparedness. By the time a warrior reached adulthood, these practices had become instinctual. Sleeping with boots on was thus a natural extension of cultural teachings, a habit that symbolized readiness, competence, and respect for both the environment and one's community. Honor and reputation also influenced behavior. In Viking society, a warrior's credibility depended on competence, reliability, and adherence to cultural norms. Being prepared, even during sleep, demonstrated responsibility and foresight. A warrior who neglected readiness risked not only personal danger, but also the trust and respect of peers and family members. In this light, wearing boots at night was a visible marker of diligence and attentiveness. It signaled that one understood the responsibilities inherent in communal living and took proactive steps to protect both self and others. Communal safety reinforced these habits. Villages were interconnected networks, where each individual's vigilance affected the well-being of the group. An inattentive warrior could endanger the longhouse by failing to respond quickly to a threat. Consequently, cultural practices emphasized not just personal survival, but the preservation of collective security. The habit of sleeping fully dressed, boots included, reflects this principle. It was a small but essential behavior that contributed to the overall resilience and functionality of the community, showing how social structures shaped daily routines in practical and profound ways. Religious and spiritual beliefs further influenced habits. Vikings believed in the interconnectedness of life, where human actions resonated with both natural forces and divine entities. Respect for the environment, attentiveness to omens, and rituals that prepared the body and mind for uncertainty were all part of this worldview. Sleeping fully clothed can be interpreted as a subtle acknowledgement of these forces, a conscious effort to align behavior with the rhythms of nature, maintain balance, and remain prepared for unforeseen events. Boots, sturdy and protective, became a physical symbol of this alignment between human ingenuity and environmental respect. Even leisure and social interaction reinforced practical habits. Gatherings around the hearth involved storytelling, strategy discussions, and exchange of knowledge. Observing the elders, warriors learned the importance of efficiency and foresight. Every task from cooking and cleaning to maintaining weapons and clothing was infused with lessons on preparedness. The habit of sleeping with boots on, when viewed through this lens, becomes more than practicality. It is a cultural ritual that reinforces values, transmits knowledge, and connects individuals to a larger societal framework. Seasonal cycles also shaped social expectations and routines. Winters were long, dark, and demanding, requiring coordination and collective effort to ensure food, heat, and safety. Summers brought different challenges, including travel, trade, and the maintenance of longships. In every season, vigilance remained a shared value, and habits adapted accordingly. Boots, as part of this adaptive system, were essential. In winter they provided warmth and protection against frost. In other seasons, they ensured readiness during travel or unexpected events. Social and environmental factors together dictated behavior, embedding the practice into the rhythm of life. Storytelling and saga traditions reinforced the importance of readiness and discipline. Tales of heroes, battles, and survival emphasized cunning, foresight, and the consequences of negligence. These narratives were more than entertainment, they were moral and practical guides, shaping expectations and behaviors. Sleeping with boots on may seem minor, but within this cultural framework, it is a concrete manifestation of the principles extolled in these stories. It is a ritualized habit that bridges myth, morality, and everyday life, blending social expectations with pragmatic needs. Gender roles and family structure also played a part. While men primarily undertook raiding and combat, women were responsible for managing households, food storage, and preparation. Their attention to detail and discipline reinforced the culture of readiness. Children observing these routines learned early that preparedness was essential, whether through clothing, footwear, or careful arrangement of household tools. Habits like sleeping fully dressed were thus taught, observed, and normalized across all members of society, reflecting the collective reinforcement of practical and cultural wisdom. Ultimately, the Viking habit of sleeping with boots on emerges as a window into the society itself. It illustrates how cultural values, communal responsibility, environmental adaptation, and psychological readiness were intricately connected. This practice is not an isolated quirk, it is a culmination of social teachings, historical experience, and environmental necessity, reflecting the depth, sophistication, and resilience of Viking life. Through this lens, even small behaviors reveal profound insights into how humans adapt to challenges while maintaining cohesion, safety, and cultural identity. By understanding these cultural and social factors, we gain a richer perspective on Viking life. We see that survival was not merely a matter of individual skill, but a network of practices, expectations, and shared wisdom that permeated daily routines. Sleeping fully dressed, boots included, was a practical habit informed by this complex web of influences, blending the individual's needs with those of family, village, and community. It is a habit that embodies vigilance, preparedness, and respect for both human and environmental dynamics, a testament to the intelligence and adaptability of Viking culture. When we step away from the reconstructed image of Viking life, colored by sagas and popular imagination, and move instead into the realm of archaeology and recorded history, we encounter a more tangible way of uncovering truth. Fragments of leather boots, preserved in damp earth for more than 1,000 years, give us voices from the past, silent but eloquent. These artifacts, combined with written accounts from chroniclers and sagas, help us understand not only how the Vikings lived, but also why certain habits, like sleeping with boots on, endured across generations. The first clue lies in the physical remains of Viking footwear. Archaeologists working in settlements such as Birka in Sweden, Hedeby in present-day Germany, and Jorvik in England, have uncovered a surprising number of well-preserved boots and shoes. Crafted from cowhide or goatskin, stitched with remarkable precision, these boots were practical tools designed for durability in harsh conditions. The wear patterns found on many of these artifacts, creased leather around the instep, reinforced soles and scuff marks near the toes, reveal that these boots were not easily discarded. Instead, they were treasured possessions, carefully maintained and often repaired multiple times. The fact that so many of these boots show signs of long-term use suggests that they were worn in a variety of contexts: travel, work, combat, and as evidence implies, even in moments of rest. Archaeologists examining Viking graves have noted that many individuals were interred still wearing their footwear. While burial practices varied across regions and centuries, this recurring detail is significant. To be buried with boots could symbolize a readiness for the journey into the afterlife, but it also points toward a life where boots were an extension of the self, kept close even in sleep. Written records further support these findings. Contemporary observers from outside the Viking world, monks, merchants, and diplomats, sometimes describe the curious habits of the Norse people. Accounts from Anglo-Saxon chronicles and Frankish sources, though often hostile or biased, provide glimpses into daily practices. In a few scattered references, Viking warriors are noted for their remarkable swiftness in rising to defend themselves, as though always prepared. While no chronicler explicitly states that they slept with boots on, the descriptions of their readiness align with such a practice. Observers marveled at how quickly Vikings could leap into battle, their weapons in hand and feet shod, while others would still be fumbling with clothing and footwear. The sagas, semi-historical, semi-mythical narratives written in later centuries, also lend weight to this interpretation. While they must be approached with caution, as they blend fact and legend, they are nevertheless repositories of cultural memory. Heroes are often described as sleeping in their armor, or being ready at a moment's notice, boots and all. Though sometimes exaggerated for dramatic effect, these literary patterns reflect real cultural expectations. The image of a warrior rising instantly from slumber, already prepared, was not just a poetic device but a reflection of admired discipline and practical necessity. In addition to graves and chronicles, experimental archaeology has played an important role in reconstructing how Vikings lived. Modern craftsmen, using traditional methods, have recreated Viking boots based on archaeological finds. When worn for long periods under authentic conditions, walking over uneven terrain, enduring cold nights, or working in damp environments, these boots prove surprisingly comfortable and resilient. Participants in these experiments have noted that, unlike many modern shoes, Viking boots soften and mold to the wearer's feet over time, becoming almost like a second skin. This explains why keeping them on even during sleep might have felt less restrictive than it does for us today. The location of archaeological finds adds another layer of meaning. In urban Viking settlements like Hedeby or Jorvik, where homes were closely packed and the risk of fire or attack was constant, sleeping fully dressed made sense. In rural farmsteads, where families often lived in longhouses that doubled as barns for livestock, boots protected sleepers from the cold, damp floor and the mess of animals. The archaeological record of these dwellings, charred timbers, compacted soil floors, layers of animal waste, reminds us that these were not comfortable modern bedrooms, but environments where practicality ruled over luxury. One particularly striking piece of evidence comes from the site of Kolpang, a trading hub in Norway. There, archaeologists unearthed not only boots, but also tools for repairing them, awls, needles, and scraps of leather. This indicates that footwear was so vital that entire industries existed to maintain it. If boots were considered indispensable enough to demand constant upkeep, it follows that they were rarely set aside, even during moments of rest. In this sense, boots were not simply clothing, they were survival equipment, kept as close as weapons or tools. Skeletal remains also provide indirect evidence. Many Viking skeletons show signs of heavy wear and tear on the lower legs and feet, consistent with lives spent in constant movement across rugged landscapes. This constant mobility reinforces the idea that boots were essential companions, always worn, always ready. When combined with written descriptions of Viking endurance and toughness, the archaeological evidence paints a picture of a people who considered footwear too valuable, too necessary, and too integral to daily function to be removed lightly. The contrast between Viking graves and those of other contemporary European cultures is telling. In many Anglo-Saxon or Carolingian burials, footwear is absent, either removed before burial or not deemed significant enough to include. Among the Vikings, however, boots appear with regularity. This difference highlights a cultural emphasis. Where others may have seen shoes as dispensable, the Norse viewed them as inseparable from identity, preparedness, and survival. Even fragments of textiles found alongside boots reinforce this narrative. Woolen leg wrappings, known as winnegers, were often found tied to boots, providing additional insulation and support. These wrappings, too, suggest a culture accustomed to layering protection, keeping feet and legs prepared for both travel and sudden emergencies. The archaeological record thus confirms what the sagas hint at: preparedness extended into every detail of daily life, right down to how one dressed for sleep. But perhaps the most powerful evidence lies not in artifacts alone, but in their interpretation. Archaeology is a discipline of careful inference, connecting scattered fragments to reconstruct a coherent picture. When we place all the pieces together, the preserved boots, the burial practices, the chronicler's remarks, the saga traditions, and the findings of experimental archaeology, the conclusion becomes clear. Vikings valued readiness so highly that even their sleep was shaped by it. Boots, durable and familiar, provided both physical protection and symbolic assurance. To sleep without them would have felt vulnerable, incomplete, even irresponsible. Thus, archaeological evidence and historical records do more than confirm a curious habit. They reveal a way of life, an outlook where every detail mattered, where survival depended on constant vigilance, and where even the smallest items of clothing carried deep cultural meaning. The Vikings' choice to sleep with their boots on was not merely a quirk of convenience, it was an expression of identity, a reflection of values, and a testament to the resilience of a people who lived on the edge of uncertainty. By studying these remnants, we bridge the centuries, gaining insight into not only how the Vikings dressed and moved, but how they thought and lived. Boots stitched with care and worn until they could no longer be repaired, remind us that history is often preserved in the humblest objects. And from those objects, we learn that readiness, resilience, and respect for survival were not just virtues of Viking warriors, they were embedded in the fabric of everyday life, even in sleep. To understand why Vikings slept with their boots on, one must step inside the heart of their domestic world, the longhouse. These vast timber-frame structures were more than mere shelters, they were living organisms, pulsing with the rhythm of family, community, and survival. When you picture a Viking longhouse, imagine not a quiet private home, but a bustling hall, where every sound, every smell, and every flicker of firelight told a story of resilience. The longhouse was both functional and symbolic, built from timber, turf, or stone, depending on regional resources. Its walls sloped inward, forming a protective shell against the northern winds. The roof was often thatched with straw or layered with turf, providing insulation during long, unforgiving winters. Inside, the space stretched, like the belly of a ship, long and narrow, sometimes more than 20 meters in length. This single structure contained the lives of men, women, children, servants, and often livestock, all under the same roof. At the center of this world burned the hearth. It was not simply a fire for cooking, it was the soul of the household. Flames crackled day and night, providing warmth, light, and a sense of continuity. Around it, families gathered to eat, weave, mend tools, and tell stories. Smoke curled upward toward a vent in the roof, though much of it lingered in the air, seeping into wooden beams and clothing alike. The smoky haze was constant, filling the lungs and eyes, but also serving as a kind of preservative, protecting the timbers from rot and driving insects away. Sleeping in such a place was not the peaceful retreat we might imagine today. Privacy did not exist. Instead, people slept side by side on raised wooden platforms or simple straw bedding laid along the walls. Furs and blankets softened the space, but the floors were hard, the air cold, and the sounds endless. The lowing of cattle, the rustle of chickens, the cries of infants, and the murmur of conversations blended into a continuous chorus of life. It is within this environment that the habit of sleeping with boots becomes easier to understand. The floor of a longhouse was not polished or clean. Packed earth, mixed with straw and animal droppings, formed the ground layer, often damp from rain or melting snow, tracked in from outside. Livestock brought warmth, but also filth, and boots offered a barrier between human skin and the constant mess beneath. Even at night, removing them entirely could mean waking with cold, damp feet, or stepping into unpleasant surprises in the dark. Moreover, the longhouse was a communal space where danger could intrude at any hour. A sudden fire, a raid, or even a dispute among neighbors required immediate action. In such moments, fumbling for shoes was a luxury few could afford. To sleep with boots on meant to be always prepared, always able to rise and respond. The habit was practical, but it was also psychological. Boots represented readiness, a shield against vulnerability in a crowded, unpredictable world. Daily routines reinforced this necessity. Mornings began early, often before dawn, with the tending of animals and the rekindling of the fire. Women busied themselves with spinning, weaving, and preparing food, while men set out to hunt, farm, or trade. Children learned by watching, imitating the tasks of their elders. In this ceaseless rhythm, there was little separation between work, rest, and duty. Sleeping with boots blurred the lines further. One could shift from dream to labor in an instant, without hesitation. The longhouse was also a place of storytelling and tradition. In the dim glow of firelight, elders recited sagas, recounting tales of gods, heroes, and ancestors. These stories were not only entertainment, but education, weaving values of courage, loyalty, and preparedness into the minds of the young. Within such narratives, the idea of a warrior sleeping fully dressed and ready was both symbolic and practical. Children grew up surrounded by the expectation that vigilance was part of daily life. Even in slumber, food preparation added to the atmosphere. The hearth doubled as a kitchen, where pots of stews and porridges simmered for hours, flavored by herbs and sometimes preserved meats or fish. The smell of smoke and food mingled constantly, soaking into clothing and boots alike. Leather footwear exposed to this environment became supple with heat and smoke, further encouraging wearers to keep them on rather than take them off. Even in moments of celebration, the boots stayed. Feasts were held inside longhouses, with benches lining the walls, and mead horns passed from hand to hand. Music, laughter, and storytelling filled the hall, but the underlying readiness remained. Boots on feet, weapons nearby, these were not contradictions to joy, but companions to it. Reminders that safety was never guaranteed. The architecture itself reinforced this mindset. With only a single door in many designs, escape or defense required swift movement. To sleep near the walls, far from the exit, meant depending on speed to reach safety. A person without boots would be slowed, vulnerable. Thus footwear was not just clothing, but part of the architecture of survival, an unspoken rule shaped by the very design of the longhouse. When archaeologists uncover the remains of these homes, the charred beams, the layers of ash, the compacted floors, they reveal more than structures. They reveal worlds where daily life was communal, survival was collective, and every decision, down to whether to remove one's boots before sleep, was shaped by necessity. Inside the longhouse, life was dense, noisy, and unrelenting, but it was also a space of resilience, where families forged bonds, where traditions were preserved, and where readiness defined existence. Sleeping with boots on was not an oddity. In such a world, it was a natural extension of life, lived in constant motion, surrounded by both loved ones and threats, cradled by the long smoky belly of the house that sheltered them all. In the Viking world, objects were rarely just objects. Every tool, every garment, and every weapon carried layers of meaning that stretched beyond its immediate use. Boots were no exception. To the modern mind, they might seem like simple leather coverings for the feet, but in the sagas, the rituals, and the daily life of Norse people, boots carried profound symbolic weight. They represented freedom, honor, readiness, and even the journey between worlds. To begin with, consider the most practical symbolism: the boot as a marker of movement. Vikings were a people in constant motion, farmers tending distant fields, traders traveling across seas, raiders venturing into foreign lands. To wear boots was to declare oneself ready to step into the wider world. They were more than footwear, they were passports to survival. A man without boots was in a sense unmoored, unable to claim the independence and strength that defined Norse identity. In the sagas, the act of putting on or taking off boots often carried dramatic importance. To step into one's boots before a duel or voyage was a ritual of preparation, a declaration that one was ready to face destiny. Removing boots, by contrast, could symbolize humility, surrender, or even death. In some funeral rites, the dead were buried with their boots still on, prepared to walk the long road to the afterlife. The simple detail of footwear became a statement of continuity, that life was a journey extending into eternity, and boots were companions on that eternal path. The construction of Viking boots itself reflected symbolic values. Made from stitched leather, often reinforced at the seams, they represented resilience and craft. Leather was both tough and flexible, mirroring the qualities expected of a good warrior or farmer. To repair one's boots was not merely an act of maintenance, it was a metaphor for perseverance. A Viking who cared for his boots was one who prepared wisely for the challenges ahead, while a man with worn, neglected footwear might be judged as careless or unfit for the rigors of life. The symbolism extended into law and ritual as well. In certain land disputes, ownership could be signified by the physical act of stepping onto property in boots, pressing one's presence into the earth. This gesture was more than symbolic. It was legal recognition that to walk upon land was to claim it. The boots then were extensions of the body's authority, stamping rights and responsibilities into soil. In a society where honor was paramount, boots became instruments of legitimacy. In mythology too, footwear was charged with meaning. The Norse gods themselves were often described with reference to their shoes. Consider the god Hermodr, who rode to Hel, the realm of the dead, wearing strong shoes that carried him through perilous journeys. In these tales, boots became symbols of divine endurance, linking the human act of walking with cosmic travel between realms. The very act of strapping on boots echoed the mythic journeys of gods and heroes, binding the everyday life of the Vikings with the eternal sagas of their deities. Sleeping with boots on, in this cultural context, was not just about practicality. It aligned with the deeper symbolism of readiness. To keep one's boots on while resting was to remain figuratively on the path, always prepared to move, to fight, or to endure. In a world where fate, or word, could shift at any moment, such vigilance was an act of respect toward destiny. A Viking with boots on his feet, even in slumber, was a man still in motion, still connected to the cycle of readiness and honor. Boots also spoke to social identity. Wealthier Vikings might adorn their boots with decorative stitching, colored leather, or metal fittings, signaling their status. The poorest, meanwhile, wore rough, patched footwear, their struggles written into every scar of the leather. Boots became a visible marker of class, labor, and dignity. They told stories of journeys taken, battles fought, and winters survived. Even in a crowded longhouse, one could often guess a person's place in society by glancing at their boots, lined along the wall, or more often still, on their feet as they slept. The ritual of gifting boots was another symbolic layer. To give someone a pair of boots was to offer not only protection but also trust. It was a way of saying, "I wish you strength in your journey." Among warriors, such a gift could be a bond of loyalty, and among family members, it was a gesture of care. In this way, boots crossed the line between the material and the emotional, becoming symbols of relationship and responsibility. Even in poetry, the image of boots appeared as metaphors. Skalds, the Viking poets, used them to describe endurance, burden, and the marks left upon the earth. A warrior who kept his boots firm upon the ground was steadfast, while one who left his boots empty was defeated or gone. Such phrases remind us that to Vikings, boots were never just coverings for the feet. They were expressions of the human condition itself. Thus, when we think of Vikings sleeping with their boots on, we should not imagine only muddy practicality. We should picture a deeper symbolism at play. A Viking who slept in boots was embodying a culture of readiness, affirming his connection to the earth, to destiny, to honor, and to the journeys of gods and men. He was never truly at rest, never separated from the path that bound him to both life and afterlife. In the flickering half-light of the longhouse, amid smoke and story, boots were constant reminders of identity. They were shields against the elements, badges of honor, tools of law, and companions in myth. To wear them even in sleep was to remain part of the great story that every Viking lived, a story where each step, awake or dreaming, carried weight, meaning, and destiny. When we imagine the Vikings preparing for battle, our minds are often filled with images of helmets, axes, shields, and swords. Yet, hidden beneath these iconic symbols of warfare, lay something equally essential, though often overlooked: their boots. For the Vikings, battle readiness began not only with the sharpening of blades or the tightening of shields, but with the simple, vital act of strapping on strong, reliable footwear. Without boots, no warrior could stand firmly, march into combat, or survive the harsh marches that carried armies across wild landscapes. Boots, in truth, were as much instruments of war as the sword or spear. The Vikings were masters of endurance. They traveled across vast seas, but also marched through forests, swamps, and frozen tundra. To be ready for battle meant being ready to move swiftly and without hesitation. A warrior's boots had to carry him from the safety of the longhouse to the prow of the longship, across wet planks slick with salt water, and then onto foreign shores where uneven ground, jagged rocks, or muddy soil waited. The sturdiness of one's boots could make the difference between entering combat with strength or stumbling at the first step. Think of a Viking raiding party setting sail at dawn. The mist still hangs low over the water, and the creak of the longship's oars echoes across the ford. Each man sits silent, his mind sharpening with anticipation. Beneath him, however, his boots press firmly against the wooden planks, keeping balance as the vessel rocks with the rhythm of the waves. The boots are not merely keeping his feet dry, they are anchoring him, preparing him for the moment when the prow strikes land and he must leap forward into chaos. In the sagas, descriptions of warriors often mention their footwear alongside their weapons. A hero was praised for having boots that carried him unwearied across long distances, or for keeping his boots firm in the mud of the battlefield. To stand one's ground, literally, was an act of honor. A warrior who lost his footing could lose not only his life, but also the honor of his kin. Thus, boots became extensions of bravery itself. They allowed the Viking to remain unshaken, even when the ground trembled with the fury of combat. The construction of battle boots reflected this purpose. Unlike lighter shoes for farming or indoor use, battle boots were often reinforced with thicker leather, double-stitched seams, and straps that bound them tightly to the calf. They were built for both protection and stability. Some even had hobnails or hard soles that gripped the earth, allowing warriors to charge across slippery ground without faltering. The boots shielded the feet from rocks, ice, and hidden roots, silent dangers that could cripple a man before he ever met his enemy. Battle readiness also had a psychological element, and boots played their part here as well. To march into war with boots securely tied was to feel a sense of grounding, a readiness that reached from the feet upward. The physical stability translated into confidence, and confidence in battle was as vital as strength. A poorly shod warrior might hesitate, distracted by pain or fear of slipping. But a warrior whose boots were strong could focus entirely on his blade, his shield, and the rhythm of combat. In this way, boots acted as silent guardians of the warrior's courage. Let us imagine a Viking encampment on foreign soil. Fires burn low in the night, casting orange light across the faces of men who rest but never sleep deeply. Some sharpen their blades, others whisper in quiet voices, and some simply sit in silence waiting. Yet most keep their boots on, even as they lie down upon their cloaks, for they know that at any moment the war horns may sound, and there will be no time to fumble with laces or straps. To sleep in boots is to accept that battle may come at any breath, and to promise oneself that when it does, one will be ready. This constant readiness was more than habit. It was woven into Viking culture. Honor demanded preparedness. A warrior caught unready was a warrior shamed. To have one's boots off when danger came was to fail in vigilance. Thus, even in moments of rest, boots were shields of dignity, protecting the warrior's reputation as much as his feet. Boots also helped define the terrifying presence of the Vikings in the eyes of their enemies. Imagine the thunder of many boots striking the ground at once as a raiding party charged ashore. The sound alone, a pounding rhythm of leather and earth, must have struck terror into the hearts of those who heard it. Before a sword was swung or an axe raised, the boots had already carried intimidation forward, echoing like the drums of war. There are hints, too, that boots carried ritual significance in warfare. Some warriors were said to consecrate their boots before campaigns, touching them with offerings or prayers, ensuring that their steps would be favored by the gods. Just as a sword might be blessed before battle, so too might boots be imbued with symbolic strength. Each stride into the fray was in this way, not only physical but also spiritual, guided by both craftsmanship and faith. But boots were not only tools of attack, they were also lifelines in retreat and survival. A Viking could lose his shield, even his sword, but if his boots held firm, he could still escape, regroup, and live to fight again. Countless warriors owed their survival not to steel, but to the leather that bore them over frozen rivers, through thick forests, or across hostile terrain where barefoot men would have perished. To Vikings whose lives were defined by journeys both physical and spiritual, the ability to move was the essence of survival, and boots were the guardians of that ability. We must also remember the wear that war inflicted upon boots. After a long campaign, boots bore scars just as warriors did, scratches, cuts, and patches that told silent stories of where they had been. To mend a pair of boots after battle was to honor the struggles endured. Many warriors grew attached to their boots, as they did to their weapons, seeing them as faithful companions. A warrior might die, but his boots could be passed on, continuing the journey with another, carrying forward both memory and legacy. Thus, when we reflect on Viking battle readiness, we must look not only to the shining steel of axes and swords, but also to the sturdy weathered boots that carried those weapons into the field. Boots were more than gear, they were foundations of victory, symbols of vigilance, and instruments of both survival and honor. To a Viking, battle readiness was a state of being, a readiness to face fate itself whenever and wherever it arrived. And in this eternal readiness, boots were ever present. They were the first thing a warrior put on when rising in the morning, and often the last thing he removed, if at all, before falling to sleep. Boots, humble yet vital, stood at the very heart of Viking warfare, grounding men in the earth, even as they reached for the glory of the gods. When the sun dipped below the horizon in Viking lands, and the sky turned to shades of violet and deep indigo, life shifted into a rhythm that was quieter, slower, and yet filled with meaning. The day's labor, whether it had been farming, crafting, trading, or preparing for war, gave way to the night, and the heart of Viking life beat most vividly inside the longhouse. To step into a Viking longhouse at night was to enter not just a building of wood and turf, but the very soul of a community. The longhouse was both practical and symbolic. It was shelter against the cold winds and snow that swept across Scandinavia, but it was also a space of memory, tradition, and belonging. Inside, generations lived side by side, elders passing wisdom to the young, children learning their first stories, and warriors resting from their journeys. At night, the longhouse was transformed into a world apart. Firelight flickered across timber beams, shadows danced upon the walls, and the sounds of the outside world faded into silence. Within this warm, glowing enclosure, life slowed, and the people gathered in shared closeness. Imagine entering such a space on a cold evening. The first sensation would be the warmth of the fire. A central hearth ran along the length of the longhouse, glowing with embers and crackling with life. The flames cast an amber light that turned the room into a golden refuge, protecting against the long, harsh winters. Smoke curled upward toward the rafters, finding its way through small openings in the roof. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, roasted meat, and dried herbs hanging from the beams. Every sense was alive, and every detail told the story of a culture deeply rooted in both survival and celebration. The people arranged themselves in ways that reflected both family and hierarchy. Elders often sat closest to the hearth, their voices carrying authority as they spoke. Warriors and farmers filled the benches that lined the longhouse walls, while children nestled close to their mothers, drifting between the warmth of sleep and the enchantment of stories. Even animals, particularly valuable livestock like goats or sheep, were sometimes brought inside at night for safety. The longhouse was thus a living ecosystem, human voices, animal sounds, and the crackle of fire weaving together into one shared rhythm. Much of Viking identity was preserved through oral tradition, and nighttime in the longhouse was when stories came alive. This was the hour of sagas and myths, of tales about Odin, Thor, and Freyja, and of ancestors who had ventured into unknown seas. A skald, or storyteller, might rise, his face glowing in the firelight, his voice carrying the room into realms of gods and heroes. Children listened wide-eyed, learning of courage, fate, and the honor that bound their people together. Adults listened too, not as passive hearers, but as participants, for the sagas reminded them of who they were and what they must strive to be. Songs often followed the stories. Voices joined together in deep, resonant tones, sometimes accompanied by the steady rhythm of simple drums or string instruments. These songs bound the community through shared memory and emotion, lifting spirits during the long winters when the world outside seemed dark and endless. In such moments, the longhouse became not only a home but also a theater, a temple, and a sanctuary all at once. Nighttime in the longhouse also served practical purposes. It was when plans were discussed, where the community would travel next, which fields must be worked, or how best to prepare for winter storms. Decisions were not made hastily, but through conversation and debate around the fire. The glow of the flames created an atmosphere of honesty and gravity, as if the fire itself bore witness to the words spoken. Thus the longhouse was not merely a dwelling, it was the council chamber of an entire community. Food played a central role in the nightly rhythm. After long days of labor, people gathered around hearty meals of stews, bread, dried fish, and meat preserved with salt or smoke. Drinking horns passed from hand to hand, filled with ale or mead, warming both body and spirit. Sharing food was more than nourishment, it was a ritual of unity. To eat together was to reaffirm bonds of kinship and trust. Even guests, whether traveling traders or neighboring allies, found welcome at the Viking table, for hospitality was a sacred duty. Yet the longhouse at night was not only a place of joy, it was also a place of solemnity, where fears and uncertainties were voiced. Outside the protective walls, dangers loomed: raids from rival clans, storms that could destroy harvests, sickness that could spread quickly. In the longhouse, people spoke of omens and dreams, wondering what the gods intended. Fireside conversations often drifted into the realm of fate, reminding all present of their fragile place within a vast and mysterious world. The design of the longhouse itself contributed to its nighttime atmosphere. Its elongated shape, with benches running along the sides and a central hearth, created a sense of inclusion and equality. Everyone faced one another, connected through the fire at the center. The walls, made of timber, turf, or stone, held not only warmth, but also echoes of countless nights gone by. Every beam, every bench absorbed the voices of those who had lived before, making the longhouse a living archive of memory. Children often fell asleep to these sounds. The flickering of the fire, the murmur of adult voices, the occasional burst of laughter, and the rhythmic breath of livestock nearby, formed a lullaby that carried them into dreams. They would drift off wrapped in furs, the soft crackle of wood their final memory before sleep. In this way, the longhouse nurtured not only their bodies but also their imaginations, planting seeds of the stories and values that would one day define their adulthood. Winter nights were especially long in the north, and so the longhouse became a world unto itself. Outside, snow piled high against the walls, winds howled across the fjords, and stars shimmered coldly in the heavens. Inside, however, warmth, light, and fellowship created a defiant contrast. To survive the winter was to endure together, and the longhouse at night was the fortress of that endurance. Even intimacy and love found their place in this setting. Couples whispered quietly in corners, finding moments of tenderness amid the larger communal life. Families huddled close, reinforcing bonds of affection. Friendships deepened through long conversations, and rivalries sometimes softened in the shared warmth of the hearth. The longhouse at night was not simply a roof over many heads, it was the weaving of many lives into a single fabric. When the fire burned low and silence finally settled, the longhouse entered a different kind of rhythm. Some warriors remained awake, standing watch by the doorway. Others slipped into restless dreams, perhaps of distant seas or coming battles. The embers glowed faintly, painting the room in a soft red light. This was the hour of deep quiet, when even the gods seemed to hold their breath. Within the stillness, the people of the longhouse found rest, strength, and the certainty that come morning life would begin anew. Thus the longhouse at night was more than a building. It was a microcosm of Viking society, a place of warmth against cold, unity against isolation, memory against forgetting. It was a school, a council hall, a theatre, and a sanctuary. It was where the Viking world was not only preserved but renewed each night. To stand inside one was to stand at the heart of an ancient rhythm that continues to echo softly across the centuries. For the Vikings, boots were not simply an article of clothing, they were companions, carrying men and women across icy fjords, damp meadows, and rocky trails. Each stitch, each strip of leather, was a silent witness to journeys of trade, exploration, and conquest. To slip on a pair of Viking boots was to step into a life of movement, for these people were never still for long. Their homes anchored them, but their boots carried them outward into the wider world. Imagine a young Viking fastening his leather laces in the cool dawn. The smell of the sea drifts inland, mixed with the earthy scent of grass and soil. The boots he wears are sturdy, crafted from cowhide or goatskin, designed not for ornament but for survival. Their soles, softened and shaped through months of wear, know the feel of earth, stone, and ship decks alike. With each step, they press into the ground, marking trails through forests, valleys, and distant shores. Journeys began at home, on narrow paths winding between farmsteads. Boots crunched over gravel and mud, tracing routes known for generations. These same boots crossed icy rivers in winter, splashed through shallow streams in spring, and trod upon hard, frozen ground when the world lay under frost. To walk in Viking boots was to endure every season, to carry the rhythm of nature beneath one's feet. But the path rarely ended in the familiar. Boots carried their wearers to markets, where goods from across Europe were exchanged. In trading towns, boots stepped across planks laid over muddy streets, past stalls overflowing with amber wool, iron and silver. Viking traders walked with purpose, their boots bearing the weight of not just goods but reputation. Every deal struck in a foreign land was possible, because boots had carried them there, bridging distances that once seemed impossible. Some boots knew the decks of longships better than land. Standing firm on damp planks, sailors adjusted sails, bailed water, and braced against waves. Salt water soaked into the leather, leaving it stiff and rough, yet still functional. Boots on ships carried men toward the British Isles, Frankish rivers, and the distant east, where silver from the Islamic world glimmered in the markets. Each coastline reached, each river entered, was a testament to how far those boots could carry their wearers. On land, boots traveled the great trade routes of Europe. In the east they followed rivers that linked Scandinavia to the Black Sea, passing through dense forests and broad plains. In the west they moved along Roman-built roads that still bore the weight of travelers centuries after the empire's fall. Boots padded through the streets of York, echoed on the stones of Paris, and pressed into the soil of Kiev. Each footprint left behind was a mark of presence, a reminder that Vikings were not only raiders, but also travelers, merchants and settlers. The boots themselves revealed much about their journeys. Archaeological finds show soles worn unevenly, evidence of countless miles walked. Some bear repairs, crude stitches added where leather tore, proof that journeys did not always allow the luxury of new footwear. Others were more carefully crafted, perhaps belonging to wealthier travelers or women of high status, their boots both practical and a reflection of dignity. But whether simple or fine, all shared the same purpose, to move with their wearer into the unknown. Consider the hardships they endured. Boots trudged through marshes, where mud clung heavy and water seeped through seams. They scaled mountain passes, where stones cut into soles, and the air grew thin. They marched through rain that turned roads to rivers, and snow that hid paths beneath silence. In every condition, boots bore the brunt of the journey, absorbing the hardship so that the traveler could endure. Yet there were joys too. Boots carried their wearers into meadows, bursting with wild flowers, onto hills where the horizon stretched endlessly, and through forests alive with birdsong. They followed paths lit by the glow of the summer sun, and by the silver of moonlight. They entered cities filled with voices speaking strange tongues, markets scented with spices, and harbors alive with the cries of gulls. To walk in boots across Europe was to encounter both hardship and wonder, woven inseparably together. The boots were not silent in memory. Each step carried stories. A trader's boots might recall the cobblestones of Dublin's, where silver coins passed hands in noisy markets. A warrior's boots remembered the muddy banks of rivers, where battles had been fought. A woman's boots told of paths to neighboring farms, of festivals where songs were sung, and of migrations that carried her family to new lands. Every pair of boots held a private archive of experience, invisible but present in the creases and wear of the leather. At night after long journeys, boots were set aside by the hearth. Damp from travel, they were stuffed with straw to dry, or repaired with new stitches by careful hands. Their presence by the fire was a quiet symbol of the day's labor, a reminder of the ground covered. In the morning they would be taken up again, ready for another stretch of road, another horizon. The cycle of travel, rest and travel again bound the boots to the rhythm of Viking life. Boots also symbolized identity. To wear boots was to show readiness, to be someone prepared for the road, the ship, or the field. Bare feet belonged to the home, but boots belonged to the world outside. They marked the traveler, the explorer, the one willing to face uncertainty. In this sense, boots were more than leather and laces. They were declarations of intent, outward signs of inner courage. The journeys they enabled were not only physical, but cultural. Through their boots, Vikings stepped into the lives of other peoples, exchanged goods, learned languages, and absorbed ideas. They brought back not only silver and silk, but also stories, customs and beliefs that enriched their own society. Boots carried them outward, and boots carried them home again, bridging worlds that would otherwise have remained separate. When we look back across the centuries, the Viking longship often takes the spotlight as the symbol of travel and expansion. Yet without the humble boot, the journeys would never have been possible. The ship carried them across seas, but boots carried them across the earth itself, step by step, mile by mile, life by life. And so when we picture a Viking traveler, it is worth imagining the boots he or she wore. Imagine the feel of rough leather against the ankle, the weight of the sole pressing into the earth, the steady rhythm of footsteps echoing across fields and forests. Each step forward was a declaration of endurance, of determination, of curiosity about what lay beyond the next horizon. The boots were not merely footwear, they were instruments of history, carrying the Vikings across Europe and into legend. In the Viking world, clothing was far more than protection from the wind, rain, and cold. It was a language of its own, silently communicating status, identity, and belonging. Every garment, every accessory, every choice of fabric or color told others who you were, where you came from, and what place you held in society. To look at Viking clothing is to glimpse the values and structures of their world, stitched directly into fabric and form. At its most basic level, clothing signaled survival. Tunics, cloaks, trousers and boots kept men and women warm against long winters and cool against damp northern summers. Wool and linen were the primary materials, woven with care in homes across Scandinavia. But even in these practical garments, the Vikings embedded meaning: the way a cloak was fastened, the richness of its dye, the cut of a tunic. All were deliberate, subtle signs of one's station. For the majority of farmers, laborers and thralls, clothing was simple and functional. Their tunics were plain, usually undyed wool, in shades of grey or brown, the natural colours of sheep. Trousers were loose, meant for movement in the fields, patched and repatched when worn thin. Women wore aprons and dresses of rougher fabric, sturdy enough for daily work. Jewelry, if present, was minimal, perhaps a small bronze brooch to fasten clothing, or a simple bead strung on a cord. Such clothing spoke clearly: these were people of labour, rooted in survival, not in luxury. Yet even among the working classes, clothing carried pride. A clean, well-kept tunic, a carefully mended apron, or a cloak brushed free of dirt was a statement of dignity. Clothing did not only reveal status to others, it shaped how individuals saw themselves. To wear decent clothing, even simple clothing, was to affirm one's worth. At higher levels of society, garments became more than necessities. They were symbols of wealth, authority, and identity. A chieftain's tunic was often made of finely woven wool, dyed in deep blues, reds, or purples, colors that required imported pigments or specialized knowledge. Cloaks might be lined with fur, signaling not only wealth but connections to trade networks that stretched across Europe. Jewelry, arm rings of silver, brooches of bronze, or even gold, adorned their bodies, turning the very act of dressing into a declaration of power. For Viking women of high rank, clothing was equally symbolic. The apron dress, often fastened with ornate brooches, served both practical and ceremonial functions. Wealthier women wore garments dyed in bright hues, decorated with beads, pendants and chains that signaled prosperity. In burials, women were often interred with these items, a sign that clothing was not just for life, but for legacy. To dress well was to be remembered well. Color itself carried messages. The process of dyeing fabric was complex and costly, requiring imported materials or skilled labor. Bright reds and yellows, deep blues and greens were associated with wealth. To wear such colors in daily life was to proclaim one's position in society without uttering a word. By contrast, undyed fabrics or muted shades reflected more modest means. In this way, the Viking world dressed in a spectrum that silently ordered its people. Beyond wealth, clothing also reflected identity in more specific ways. Warriors, for example, often wore clothing that emphasized readiness for battle. Shorter tunics allowed freedom of movement, belts carried knives or tools, and cloaks provided warmth without hindrance. The very cut of their garments made them appear prepared, a living reminder of the importance of defense and honor. By contrast, traders often dressed in ways that highlighted their connections abroad. Exotic fabrics, patterned silks, or unusual jewelry hinted at travels to distant lands. Their clothing was proof of their journeys, tokens of the wider world stitched into their daily lives. Religion, too, found expression in clothing. Some pendants and brooches bore symbols of faith. Thor's hammer, for example, worn proudly as both ornament and declaration of belief. Others carried Christian crosses, particularly in later centuries, when contact with Europe brought new ideas. Clothing thus became a canvas upon which spiritual identity was displayed quietly, but unmistakably. In festivals and ceremonies, clothing took on an even greater role. Weddings, feasts and religious rites were opportunities to dress in finery. Men might wear their brightest cloaks, their finest jewelry, and their most polished boots. Women adorned themselves with beads, chains and dresses of vivid color. Clothing at such events was more than appearance, it was performance. To attend in fine garments was to honor the occasion, to show respect for gods, ancestors, and community. Even children's clothing reflected identity. While simpler and smaller than adult garments, they often mirrored the status of the family. A chieftain's child might wear a brightly dyed tunic, or small pieces of jewelry, signaling their inherited rank. A farmer's child wore plain wool, practical for play and labor. In this way, clothing trained children early in the language of status, preparing them to step into adult roles. Clothing also marked boundaries between peoples. When Vikings traveled abroad, their garments distinguished them from others. Foreign chroniclers often described them by their clothing: cloaks fastened with brooches, tunics belted at the waist, trousers that seemed unusual to outsiders. These details became markers of cultural difference, shaping how the Vikings were perceived by those they encountered. At the same time, contact with other lands influenced Viking dress. Imported silks, silver thread embroidery, and exotic patterns filtered into their wardrobes, blending foreign with familiar. Clothing thus reflected not only who they were, but who they encountered. The importance of clothing is seen most clearly in burial practices. Archaeologists have uncovered graves where garments were preserved in fragments. The placement of brooches, beads, and belts suggests how the dead were dressed, often in their finest attire. To bury someone in fine clothing was to honor their life, to ensure they entered the afterlife with dignity. In some graves, warriors were dressed for battle, women in their most elaborate dresses, children in garments that reflected their families' hopes. Even in death, clothing continued to speak. For the Vikings then, clothing was both practical and symbolic. It shielded them from the harsh climate, but it also ordered their society, reflected their beliefs, and carried their identities. Every stitch was part of a greater story, one in which garments were not silent coverings, but active participants in life's drama. Imagine a Viking gathering. Farmers arrive in sturdy, earth-toned wool cloaks, patched from years of use. Traders stride in wearing brighter hues, their cloaks hinting at distant journeys. Warriors stand in tunics cut for movement, belts heavy with knives. At the center, a chieftain sits in garments dyed deep red, fur draped across his shoulders, silver brooches gleaming in the firelight. His wife beside him wears a dress of bright blue, brooches heavy with beads and chains. Around them, children mimic their parents' attire, smaller but unmistakably marked by family and rank. In this gathering, no words are needed. Clothing alone reveals the structure of society. In modern times, it is tempting to think of Viking clothing as primitive, simple garments of wool and leather, but to do so is to miss the deeper truth. Clothing was a language, rich with nuance, understood instinctively by those who wore it and those who saw it. It was a language of survival and pride, of status and spirituality, of individuality and community. To put on Viking clothing was not merely to dress the body, it was to take one's place in society, to carry identity on one's skin, woven into every fiber.